So we will start with a summary. This is from a mamar that was written by Diane. It's actually in a sefer called Orchos Mishpat from Rabbi Tzvi Oshinsky, who's a veteran Diane in Eretz Yisrael. It's a sikkum. It's useful for us because it is a sikkum, a summary of the positions of the Gedalia Achronim on specifically the Oilei, those that came from Russia. I suppose to wrap up our sugya a little bit. So let's go through this. Let's just go through this sheet. L'das Hagon Rabbi Yosef Shalom Eliashiv Zatzal. Ein Rishus Lismoich al Din Roiv Elo Legabe Kol Mikra Proti Sheba Lefoneinu. Rabbi Eliashiv was of the opinion that we rely on Roiv when a specific situation presents itself. That's when you utilize Roiv. Avol al manhigei hatzibur u'ma'areches botei hadin muteles choiva lidoig levarer ad kamo shebiyicholtom kedei shlo yisarvu goyim bekerem Yisrael ve'ein lehem lismech lechatchila al din kol de porish meruba porish. This is an incredibly important perspective, not only because it's from the Rabbi Eliashiv, who, the Gedalia HaPoskim of this Torah, but it also tells us a lot about the way a Godel feels the achrayus for Klal Yisrael. And there is almost, you sense in this here something almost, if one can say such a thing, meta-halachic. There is a halach, of course, called the parish miruba parish, which means, and by the way, I want to stop here for a second, because there's a Chazon Ish I didn't really tell you, and it's going to be important for us, possibly still this morning. Let me take you back to the Tosfos. In fact, let me just remind myself. Tosfos in Psachim. Let's just remind ourselves. Go back to Makar. Right back at the beginning. Tosfos source 4. So Tosfos said as follows. Sorry, just a second. No. No, actually it's Tosfos in Yevamos. I'm sorry. Just a second. Tosfos in Yevamos. 3. Yeah. So Tosfos in Yevamos says that we can rely on a Roiv. If somebody comes and says that I am Jewish, we rely on that. There's a Roiv. Now, what sort of Roiv? Tosfos brings a proof from the Gemara in Psachim. The Gemara in Psachim. Remember? The Gentile, the Goy, who used to enjoy his Pesach night shawarma, yes, his Korban Pesach. Says Tosfos, that is the proof text. Then there's a Roiv. Let me ask you a question. Think carefully before you answer. And here I need to involve you a bit. That Roiv, is that a Ruba de Isa Kamon or a Ruba de Lesser Kamon? The Roiv in that case. Sami, you need to focus. In Psachim? Yeah. Is that a Ruba de Isa Kamon or a Ruba de Lesser Kamon?
That's the Itak.
Explain.
Because the Lesser Kamon is on statistics, but here we have the case. It's in front of us.
Correct. You're absolutely correct. That's really, really important. There in Psachim, we had a group of people around a table in Yerushalayim, and they were eating Korban Pesach. Mm-hmm. We absolutely know that a Roiv of those people are Jewish. And now we are discussing somebody who is Porish. He moves away from. Mm-hmm. He detaches himself from a group, from a specific known Roiv in front of us, in front of our eyes.
To a certain behavior?
Well, no. He has come and he has said he has said, okay, he told us later we found out that he was a Gentile, right? But at the time, how come, remember, what's the proof? Let's go back, sorry, let's get this clear. It's been a while since we looked at that Gemara. This is a fellow who we eventually found out was not Jewish, but nobody bothered to check. So there's the proof, says Tosfos, that you don't need to check. You don't need to check. Why don't you need to check? Because rove of people that are here are Jewish. Anybody who is viewed as having detached themselves from that group, called a parish, meruba parish. That is a gzeras hakosov. And we're going to actually discuss that a bit later today. Is that logical, or is it on the basis of a gzeras hakosov? And there's very big differences. I want to discuss it now, but we will come back to it, okay? Again, the classic case, which you will come across as you're learning Ksubas, yes, the classic case is 9 butcher shops, 10 butcher shops, okay? A piece of meat detaches itself. Well, it doesn't detach itself. Somebody doesn't get up and walk, yeah. But somebody somebody goes and buys meat from one of the butcher shops, and we find the meat lying in the street in front of, and we know it's come from one of these. So the halacha is we have a rove of butcher shops in front of us. It is not in the original place where the suffix was born, so to speak. The doubt is created, and this becomes quite complicated. Reb Shimon Shkop, in his magnum opus, Shari Yesha, talks a lot about this. There's a big discussion in the Achronim, and again, we are going to actually learn, hopefully, a piece of Reb Shimon a little bit later. A bit of luck. I find a piece of meat on the street. It has been detached from what? From a known entity, from a known rove. There is a rove in front of us. Let's take a classic case. Let's take 9 shops which sell kosher meat. The 9 shops sell kosher meat. One of them is treif. Okay? I find a piece of meat lying on the street, no way of working out, being able to look at it or be able to tell whether it's a kosher piece of meat or not. You absolutely, the Torah says you can follow the majority. Kol de parish, meruba parish. Something that has become detached from a known rove in front of us. That's ruba de isa, come on. Kol de parish, meruba parish. And therefore it is kosher and you can eat it. Okay? Mm-hmm. A question that we're going to have to ask ourselves is this logical? Is this based on, is it similarly, like Ruba de Lesser, come on. Let's remind ourselves. What's Ruba de Lesser, come on? Give an example. Roiv behemois that are shechted are found to be kosher and not treif. Or, another example, most people who pick up a knife and do shchita know what they're doing. And they're doing well. But let's go back to the first one. Roiv behemois ksheris. Let's assume, right, that there is a statistic that most animals which are shechted are not treifos. Okay, they're not treif. Now the truth is we do check. So why do we check the lungs of animals? Because there is a significant minority, but the roiv is kosher. Here's a question for you. What would be if an animal was shechted and then mysteriously all other cows were wiped out by an asteroid? And there is only one cow left in the world, and it's this one which has just been shechted. Are you allowed to eat it?
Because of Ruba the...
Let's first ask him. Are you allowed to eat it? A cow was shechted.
Yes.
Right? Or we could even do it the other way around. We could even say, did the asteroid hit before it was shechted or not? I don't think it necessarily makes much difference, to be honest with you. I was just thinking about that. But either way. Mm-hmm. I now have this cow has been shechted. Let's say I have no ways to check it. Yeah. May I rely on the fact that it is kosher?
I think so.
Yes. Yeah. Why? Now is that statistic?
I mean,
there's no statistic anymore
because this one law is independent of the others.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't change the statistic.
That's right. So it doesn't matter whether they are in front of us or not.
Yeah, right.
The halacha is that is a rove, which is a statistical rove. Right? Then we have this other, and it's important for us to appreciate the difference between the two, because sometimes the lines can get a bit blurred. Whereas in the case of these, the piece of meat in front of the butcher shops, is that also a statistic, but it's just a much smaller subset that we're able to observe? Or do I say, no, this is operating in a totally different way. This is a gzeras hakosuv, that you follow the majority. Acharei Rabbim, you follow the majority. The Torah is talking about a ruba de isa kaman, a roiv that is in front of us, a piece of meat, like in front of these 10 shops. Is that on the basis of a piece of logic, statistics, or is it a gzeras hakosuv? And don't answer yet. I just want to throw the question out there for the moment. Mm-hmm. But let's go back to our Tosfos. So we have a single individual, right? So at the time, he is part of a roiv. He has separated himself from that roiv, right? Says Tosfos, surely we have a proof from that Gemara that you do not need to check somebody for whether they are Jewish or not. Why? You have no reason to check because there is a roiv. Where is the roiv? The roiv is sitting around this Seder table. It's a ruba de isa kamon. Mm-hmm. Says Tosfos, hold on a second. But that, maybe I can't use that Gemara. That's no good. Why is that Gemara no good? Because there we have a ruba de isa kamon. Right? Whereas now, what we're discussing here in Yevamos is a person who just shows up. Mm-hmm. There's no roiv here in front of us. So maybe it's no proof. You remember this Tosfos? Let's do it again inside very quickly. Ve'ein loymar shani hosam lava samchi aruba dehava Yisrael. Don't say that it's only valid over there because there you have a ruba de isa kamon. Says Tosfos counters by saying, no, we have another roiv, a ruba de lesa kamon. The habachol makim name ikaruba. We have another roiv. Why? Roiv haboyin lefonenu b'teiras Yahadus Yisrael. Remember, there's a statistic, a ruba de lesa kamon, that most people who present themselves as Jewish end up being Jewish. Says the Chazon Ish. So let me ask you, pshat in this Tosfos. So at the end of the day, one opinion in Rishonim, remember we saw, says that the reason that we believe somebody who comes and says that they are Jewish is because Milsa David Ligluya. That was one shitta in the Rishonim. Tosfos says it's based on roiv. At the end of the day, which roiv is it? Is it ruba de isa kamon or ruba de lesa kamon? Tosfos here would appear to want to say that. He starts off by saying it's a roiv. He says, 1 minute. But in the Gemara in Pesachim, which is my main proof text, that's a ruba de isa kamon. Maybe it's no longer valid because we're now talking about our case over here where somebody just shows up. I don't have a ruba de isa kamon. Says Tosfos, yeah, we have another roiv, a ruba de lesa kamon. So at the end of the day, which one do we rely on? Says the Chazon Ish, I'll put you out of your misery. He says, although Tosfos counters by saying there is also ruba, there is a ruba de lesa kamon, he says, but actually, fundamentally, we rely on a ruba de isa kamon. The roiv that really Tosfos is madcha, right? He says, yeah, we have another roiv. But really, what we need to rely on is a ruba de isa kamon. Now, we're going to have to therefore work a little bit to understand where is the ruba de isa kamon when you have migration. Because most people in Russia are not Jewish. And therefore, the people who separated themselves from there have come, called the Porish Meruba Porish, and therefore they should be Gentiles. There is a way around this with another Gemara in Ksubas Daf Tesvav, which we'll come back to later, which talks about if an identifiable group, the word you want to get into your vocabulary and write it down is Sia. Samach Yud Ayin Hey. And we'll see the Gemara inside, although maybe not today. If a group of Jews, or a group that we know were at least roiv Jewish. This is the Gemara. The Gemara talks about a Sia, a group of roiv Jews came from a town which was roiv not Jews. Again, you have the Gemara in Ksubas. I'll read you out I didn't actually have it. I don't know if I have the Lashon Gemara in front of me.
So it speaks about like an enclosed group, which is like...
Correct. So this is what we're going to, exactly what we're going to. The Lashon Gemara is, find the Lashon Gemara again. I should have brought it. Siyah shel bnei Adam ksherim shehigia le'ir nidoinin keroiv ksherim. So we have a town where they are mostly Gentile. We have a town, Russia, mostly Gentile. A group detaches itself from that. And in that group, we know independently that roiv of the people in that group are Jewish, or ksherim. Then one person detaches themselves from that group. So we say kol de porish.
Yeah.
Kol de porish from what? Not from the original,
From the group.
but from the siyah, from the group. And therefore, there's a big if here, because it's not at all clear that the majority of people who exited, it's not at all clear statistically, by the way, that the majority of people who exited the former Soviet Union claiming to be Jewish actually were Jewish. But that,
So we have the suffix in the sea.
yeah, correct. But that's another problem. But we need to try, we're trying to find a way here, okay? So just to mention that there is a concept of siyah, right? All right. Let's go back to Rabbi Elyashiv for a bit. And Rabbi Elyashiv says as follows: whilst it is true, so therefore the reason I made this digression was because of the lashon here. Ve'ein lahem lismech lechatchila al din kol de porish meruba porish. Right? You see that Rabbi Elyashiv would say that potentially you might be able to use kol de porish meruba porish as the reason, as the yisoid to say that somebody here is Jewish, right? So in other words, he's using Ruba de Isa Kamon, not Ruba de Lesa Kamon, number one. But then his main chiddush, and again, we're just going to gloss over this. There's a lot more to what he is saying. You look at it in the Makor. But what he is saying is that although it is true that we can and should follow Dinei HaTorah in any specific individual instance, but when Botei Din also have a broad achrayus, responsibility to Klal Yisrael. And therefore, even though he's saying something in a way quite revolutionary, Manhigei HaTzibur u'Mareches Botei Hadin have an obligation to create higher standards, even though we know. So if you had, because now where do you draw the line? I suppose it was a very unusual little period in history where all of a sudden hundreds of thousands of people descended on Israel within a decade, 1 million or so, right? It's a mass migration, and therefore it is incumbent upon those with achrayus for Klal Yisrael, the Botei Din as a whole, to say it could be that we could technically look at it and say on each individual case maybe called a parish, miruba parish, potentially, but we would be doing Klal Yisrael a disservice, and therefore we have the right to demand higher standards, the right and the obligation. That's and he brings a proof. Look at the brackets. Kashem shechoy valatzibur lechoinin mareches kashrus shetimona has hachnosas peiros orlo l'shuk. In the same way that any reputable kashrus organization has an absolute obligation to make sure that when they give a hechsher on whatever it is, to make sure that the fruits of orlo do not find their way into the market. Even though you might well be technically an individual. If I come home, let's say, from Edeka, whatever, and I have some orange juice. And I can't see, it doesn't say where the orange juice has come from, right? Well, let's say like a Shemitah or Orla, maybe it came from Eretz Yisrael, maybe. It doesn't say. I look, it doesn't say. Am I allowed to drink it? Yes, I am. Why? Because most fruit juice does not come from Eretz Yisrael, right? Now, would a kashrus organization be able, therefore, just to give a hechsher on that? Or would it have an obligation to actually investigate?
What you said with the higher standards here,
correct.
Then at home, less than
Absolutely. So it's that type of thing, right? For the tzibur, there is such a thing as a chiyuv, achrayus for the tzibur. That is Rabbi Elyashiv. So Rabbi Elyashiv was of the opinion that you can't just simply say, even though maybe technically speaking, for an individual me'ika hadin, you could say it would be okay, but you have to set a higher standard. That's the first derech in halacha l'maisa. Next, Kabbalah biyodeinu me'agon Rav Moshe Feinstein Zatzal. We have a Kabbalah. Look at the, just to show you where this comes from. This is look at the brackets here. This is from Sefer Zichorim B'Sefer, Rav Pinchas Goldschmidt. Yeah? Kabbalah biyodeinu. Sorry? The first one was Rav Farbstein was quoting Rabbi Yashiv, correct? That's in the journal Tchumin. Then Rav Goldschmidt is quoting Rav Moshe Feinstein. He says, Kabbalah biyodeinu. Shekayomim shloisha drochim lebirur yahadusam shel Yehudei bris hamoyatzos. There are potentially 3 different avenues of investigation and clarifying the Jewish identity and status of those from the former Soviet Union. Aleph, Rishum Halaum HaYehudi. The documentation. They are where they are registered as in their nationality in the birth certificate that it says Jew. That's number 1. That's one way of. Number 2, Shmois Muvhokim Shel Yahadus. Names that are exclusively used by Jews. So if somebody is called Shnei Zalman, it's highly unlikely that he's not Jewish, right? For example. Now, there are other names. So for example, Jacob. There are many Gentiles called Jacob. Doesn't mean anything. So it's got to be Shemus Muvhokim Shel Yahadus. Yeah, with a girl, I don't know, a Genendel, or, some of these names which are very, very Jewish, so to speak. And Gimel, thirdly, Yedias Sfas HaYehudis, Yehudis v'chein HaMasoris HaYehudis. So, speaking Yiddish, many of you may know, probably better than I, those who are today probably in their 80s from Russia, some of them will speak Yiddish. And that's a clear indication. It is an indication. And also, Masoris Hayadus. I think we discussed a case last week of somebody who, their mother lit candles Friday night.
That always reminds me on the airports in Ben-Gurion.
Yeah.
What do you do on Yom Kippur? They always like...
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Right, okay. It's a good job they don't ask the Israelis. In my day, what it used to be is they used to go to the video shop and rent like 27 videos. What do we do on Yom Kippur? We watch... Anyway, never mind. No. V'chein ha-Masoris ha-Yehudis, yeah. Hagon Moshe Feinstein posak sheyesh la'asher Yahadus al smach shtayim mitoch shloisha harayos hanal. 2 out of 3 is good enough for Moshe Paskin. Any 2 of those 3 is enough to establish that somebody's Jewish. Cain, similarly, Ayin Piskei Din Rabbanim Birur Yahadus Shalidei Moed Sa'adatis Yerushalayim. Rav Kulitz Zatzal, Rav of Yerushalayim, time. He said, "Ishu Yahadus Yonotin Rak b'Mikrim Dilahalon." Rav Kulitz paskened that, and this is what they did in the religious council of Yerushalayim and Moatzadatit in Yerushalayim, that they would give Ishu Yahadus only to those who say Rak L'Toyin Yisrael Ani. Somebody who says, "I am Jewish," they would actually have to positively make that claim, or a woman who said that about her son. Mevakshim me'atoyen sheyazbir dvarov. And then they would ask somebody who says they're Jewish, tell me, how do you know you're Jewish? Yoidei lesaper al minhagim Yehudim usfas Yiddish. He would have to be able to talk about having a Seder night, wearing tzitzis, putting on tefillin, eating matzah, lighting candles, usfas Yiddish, and also to Yiddish, as well as documentation. What do you see from this? What do we see from this? Rabbi Yashiv, Rabbi Moshe, and Rabbi Kulitz. Very different poskim, operating sometimes in different areas. But what do you see? One thing that I think becomes very clear, that although we have seen, and this is important, although we have seen that Roiv Rishonim, it's very clear, most Rishonim say, either because of Milsa David Legluya or because of a Roiv, that the baseline halacha would appear to be that if there's no reyasa, if there's no reason to suggest otherwise, and somebody just shows up and says, "Hi, I'm Jewish," me'ika hadin, it would seem that would be enough for us to accept them as being Jewish. However, you see from the modern poskim that they ask for more. Lemaisa, they ask for more. Okay? And the reasoning, we've seen Rabbi Elyashiv's reasoning, and we're going to see a little bit more reasoning as well. We're going to see a little bit more reasoning as well, because, again, I haven't dug very deeply into the statistics, to be honest with you, but there is no question that a significant minority, if not a majority, of those who emigrated claiming to be Jewish were not Jewish. That's very clear. Like I say, I have not dug into doing the statistics, but if I'm not mistaken, I have a vague memory that the Sochnut themselves, I think, agreed that at least a third, if not a quarter, if not a third of those. So there's a significant minority that they, even by their own figures, were not Jewish. It's really not clear that there is a rove of those that came. So is it true to say nowadays the Ruba de Lesser come on, Rave Haboim Lefanenu B'Torah Yahadus, are Yisraelim? I'm not sure whether that's actually statistically correct anymore. I don't know. Just because I don't know doesn't mean anything. We'd have to check that out. Let's move to something a little bit different. A little bit of time left. And it's going to be, we'll do a little bit of Lomdus. Right? A little bit of Lomdus. So we have this, I brought in this idea of a siyah. Right? So we have and maybe this is going to help us. Maybe we look at each plane. How do you look at this? And this is what Rav Moshe Chafayv asks. How we have a siyah, right? Do we look at each plane load that arrives on its own? Is that the siyah? Do we look at all of the migration together? How do we do this? It's question number one. Yeah? There's no question, if we're going to use, as the Chazon Ish suggests, that what Tosfos is saying is that we use Kol Deporish, well, then we have a major problem, because Russia is mainly Goyim. So Kol Deporish, Meruba Porish means they're Goyim. So we can't rely on that. Can't compare it to people sitting around the Seder table in Yerushalayim there, the Gemara Pesachim, right? So how does this work? Next point. And that we'll probably only get the answer to tomorrow, hopefully. Next point. And this is, we're going to the Lomdus. And the reason I decided to actually do this is because you're learning Ksubas, aren't you? Where are you up to?
Mid of Perik 1.
Okay. What daf?
No, we're on the second.
You're still early on, but you're going to come to this. So you'll remember this when you're going to come to this soon. So, Rabbi Akiva Eiger and many, if not most of the Achronim understand as follows. The difference between the two types of rove, Ruba de Isa Kamon and Ruba de Lesser Kamon, are as follows. Ruba de Lesser Kamon is statistics. It's logic. It's a svara. It's probability.
You wouldn't say empirical.
Sorry?
You wouldn't say empirical.
Well, it's not a proof. Yeah. It's not a proof. The Torah says we can rely on Ruba de Lesser Kamon. So most animals end up being kosher. Right? Most people who pick up a knife to do shchita know what they're doing. It's kind of empirical. Right. It's statistical. Yeah. And you can rely, the Torah says we're allowed to rely on that. Okay? But it's not just a quote unquote a crazy thing with no rational basis. No. There is a probability basis to it, which kind of a mathematical statistical basis, which kind of makes sense, and therefore it is what we would call a svara. On the other hand, says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, this is where it gets complicated. On the other hand, says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, the other type of rove, Ruba de Isa Kamon, in other words, called the Porish, Meruba Porish, is not based on svara, it's a gzeira sakosov. It's not based on logic. Now, that's his statement. Now, this is a statement that needs to be understood. Hold on a second. Let me ask you a simple question. Rabbi Shimon Shkop asks the following question. Let's say I have here 10 lottery tickets, and I know that one of them is a winner, right? There's 10 lottery tickets here, one of them is a winner. How much would you pay you'd pay a certain amount for one lottery ticket. For 9 lottery tickets, you'd pay a pretty hefty premium. You'd pay a lot. Why? Because there is a logic. Because even though it's a Ruba de Isa Kamon, but there's a statistic here as well. There's a very good statistical probability that if I buy 9, that I'm going to end up... So don't tell me it's Xera Sakosov, asks Reb Shimon. So how can Rabbi Kiva and the other Achronim say that Ruba de Isa Kamon does not appear to be based on logic? It's Xeris HaKosuv. Surely there is a logic to it as well. However, we're going to discover something really quite interesting. Here's a shaila. Here's a shaila to you. What would be, and you've got to hear it in the sheets. What would be? Let me just give it to you outside first. What would be if you have 10 butcher shops, right? We have 10 butcher shops. 9 of them sell kosher meat. 1 of them sells treifa meat. The treifa butcher shop sells a lot of meat. It doesn't sell more meat than all of the other 9 put together, but it sells significantly more than any one of them on their own. And now we ask ourselves 2 questions. There is a piece of meat lying in front of the shop. I ask myself 2 questions. Is it kosher? And who does it belong to? One is a question in Choshen Mishpat. I need to paskin. Let's say somebody didn't buy it. Right? It's a question in Aveda. A question in Aveda. A question in Choshen Mishpat. I need to decide. It's lying in front of this row of shops. No way of seeing which one it is. And each of them, adds Reb Shimon in this question, each of these shops is owned by a different person. Okay? So I have, let's just give some numbers to it for argument's sake. This butcher shop sells 900 kilos of meat. 800. It sells 800 kilos of meat. It has in it, it sells, that's it. The others each sell 100 kilo of meat. And I have this one piece of meat. So the first question, let's say, you could argue what the order of the questioning would be, but when I come and ask, go to a dayan and I say, so we have 10 people come in front of the Beis Din, each of them say it's my piece of meat. So the halacha is, based on the Gemara Bava Basra, the halacha is, we would look at the size of the shop and say, you, the treifa one, sell 800 kilo, the others each, on their own, only sell 100, it's yours. It belongs to you. Okay, so it belongs to the owner of the treifa shop. Got it? Now let's ask ourselves another question. Is this piece of meat kosher or not? So I have 9 butcher shops which sell kosher meat. I have 1 which sells treif. The halacha is called the porish, meruba porish. So it's kosher. So we have a kosher piece of meat which belongs to the shop that owns the shop that sells exclusively treif. You hear this? Isn't that a beautiful paradox? Reb Shimon uses this to demonstrate that it's not rational, that it's not statistical. Although you hear this, in other words, kol de parish, it's an illusion. It's a very clever way of pointing out that in Shulchan Aruch, in Choshen Mishpat, we will paskin that this piece of meat belongs in mominus. It belongs to the owner of the treifa shop. Because he sells 800 and each of them on their own only sells 100. But then we say to ourselves, hold on, you guys sell you guys most of the meat. By a little bit of a margin. Most of the meat is actually kosher. And therefore, so it's a kosher piece of meat belonging to the thing who only sells treif. So that's the halacha. So you see, it's a genius. So you see in Mominus, in Choshen Mishpat, we say that it belongs to him. So you see that kol de porish, meruba porish is a gzeira sakosuv. It isn't logical. It isn't logical. That's how Reb Shimon. Let's have a look at it. We don't even need to do it inside. I'll leave it to you. You can take away the sheet. Here it's in Shad Dalet Perek Yud. And I think I'm actually for today, I'm going to leave it here. We'll take it forward tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, with the Lomdus and try and wrap it up and then see how we can actually apply these principles when we talk about the different roiv that we're going to employ in order to work out whether the people that have emigrated, whether they're Jewish or not. Okay?